Have you ever wondered what you would do if someone looked you in the eye in front of your entire family and asked, "Are you enjoying the lake house I gave you?" When you've never seen it, never received anything, and yet everyone expects an answer? That Thanksgiving, I thought the best I could do was swallow my pride and smile, just to avoid embarrassment. But when I heard those words, my head filled with doubts. Why had my millionaire son suddenly brought up this topic? Had I been deceived all this time? Every detail of that night stuck with me. The crossed glances, the sweating hands, the feeling that the ground could fall away at any moment. I had no idea what I was about to discover, nor how my life would be turned upside down by a simple question. But before I tell you what happened in that room, you need to understand what my life was like before everything fell apart. November 23rd, 2022. It was a Thursday, Thanksgiving Day, and the kitchen clock read 5:15 p.m. when I heard that expensive engine sound, different from my neighbors' wrecked cars. I lived in a simple housing project on the outskirts of Buffalo, New York. My apartment was on the third floor of 210th Block D, with a small window overlooking the parking lot, riddled with cracks and faded lines. I was 66 years old, with my hair pulled back in a makeshift bun, a faded Bills t-shirt, and well-worn sweatpants. That afternoon started like any other. I straightened the couch, gave the living room table a quick dusting, and put a frozen lasagna in the oven because I had neither the time nor the energy to invent anything better. The only things left in the cupboard were a package of macaroni, a can of corn, and a nearly empty jar of mayonnaise. Even so, I tried to tidy everything up so as not to embarrass myself if a neighbor stopped by. My name is Margaret. I've been working as a cleaner for almost 20 years at a downtown hotel, the Horizon Suites, on the other side of the city. I arrive there every day before 6 in the morning, and when work ends, I return home carrying bags of groceries or leftovers that the other employees share at the end of their shift. My days are filled with a list of rooms to clean, heavy sheets, strong-smelling products, a broom, a squeegee, a blue uniform, and rubber shoes with worn soles. I can't remember the last time I had a holiday off. A busy hotel never stops. But that day, I asked to leave early, and my supervisor, Kelly, let me because she knew my son was coming to dinner with me. Eric was always my pride and joy, even after he grew up and went to work in technology, selling software to large companies. He was 38 years old, lived on the other side of town, almost in the Lake District, in a complex where each house was bigger than my entire block. We hardly saw each other. I missed the long conversations we'd have when he was younger, the domino games on the porch, the stories we'd make up to pass the time when the power went out. The truth is, in recent years, the distance has only grown. Sometimes I'd text him to ask how he was, if he needed anything, but the most I'd get was a rushed, "I'm fine, Mom," or a 2-second voice message. That Thursday was cold, and the noisy heater wasn't up to snuff. I paced the living room, trying to figure out what to say when they arrived. Brittany, my daughter-in-law, was unlike anyone else in our family. Always in high heels, brushed hair, flawless makeup, and a sweet perfume that lingered in the house long after she left. I never saw Brittany wear the same outfit again. And even at the simplest events, she made a point of showing up as if she were attending a gala. I knew she didn't like my apartment. She'd commented several times about the smell of cleaning products, the lack of space, and the noise from the neighbors. Even so, I accepted their invitation to this dinner because I wanted somehow to recapture that sense of family that seemed to have disappeared after Eric got married. I set the table with the silverware I'd received for my 50th birthday, grabbed 2 glasses and a white tablecloth with an old coffee stain. I tried to make everything look tidy, but looking around the room, I saw only the signs of time. The sagging sofa, the faded pillows, the old photos on the bookshelf, the smell of frozen lasagna, mixed with lemon disinfectant. I turned on the TV just to drown out the silence, but the noise of the car outside made my chest tighten strangely. When the doorbell rang, I wiped my hands on my apron, straightened my bun, and took a deep breath before opening the door. Eric stood there, his hair neat, his coat thick, his shoes clean, and his watch expensive. Brittany beside him held a gold gift bag. They greeted each other quickly, without much ceremony, and then entered, looking around as if searching for flaws. I tried to smile and asked how their day had been, but my voice sounded thin and uncertain. Brittany complained about the cold, asked if the lasagna was beef or chicken, and then remained silent, fiddling with her phone, while Eric glanced at his watch and asked where he could leave his coat. Deep down, I knew those 2 hours together would be a test of patience. I had no idea that dinner would be the turning point of my life, and that's why, to this day, every detail of that arrival has remained engraved. The smell of the disinfectant, the crunch of the bag on the floor, the sound of the wall clock ticking away. And now I want to know, have you ever felt left out of your own home, trying to please someone who no longer seemed to see you? Write in the comments about the most uncomfortable or unfair situation you've ever experienced within your own family, and what went through your mind at that moment. I want to know who out there has felt the ground slip away before the tragedy truly began. And that night, everything seemed so strange. I had no idea how much was yet to come. The truth is, back then, my life followed a script that seemed to never change. I'd wake up before sunrise, with the clock radio reading 5:30, and drag myself from bed straight to the cramped bathroom, trying to save every drop of hot water. It was cold in Buffalo almost year-round, but that particular morning, the wind gusting against the window seemed stronger than usual. After a quick shower, I'd put on my Blue Horizon Suites uniform, the seams already frayed in the pockets, and a tag on my chest with my name crookedly embroidered, Margaret. My shift started at 6:15 sharp, and I had less than 20 minutes to walk the 2 blocks to the bus stop, always afraid of missing the time and having my paycheck docked. The bus on line 42 was my daily companion, noisy, with torn seats and the smell of food mixed with old disinfectant. No one said anything. Everyone stared at the ground or at their cell phones. When it rained, the roof leaked and dripped onto my shoulder. I spent almost 40 minutes there, sitting by the window, thinking about the bills I had to pay that month. Electricity, gas, the cost of the blood pressure medication my insurance had stopped covering since September, the credit card payment that kept growing, the rent that went up $80 in October without anyone explaining why. The phone at home only rang for collections. I already knew the voice of the power company operator by heart, who called almost every week threatening to cut off the power if I didn't pay by the end of the month. Some days I left the phone off the hook just to avoid hearing more promises of installment payments I could never keep. At the hotel, my job was simple and exhausting. Each floor had 20 rooms, and I had to have everything ready before lunch. Beds made, bathrooms cleaned, towels changed, trash taken out, and carpets shaken out in the hallway. I used products that left my hands dry and full of strong odors, and by the end of the day, the soles of my cheap sneakers felt thinner. I had a colleague, Rita, who said we were invisible because no one noticed the job was done properly, except when there was a lack of toilet paper or a strand of hair left in the shower. One day I spent 3 hours trying to remove a wine stain from the carpet in room 112, without gloves, because the last one ripped the day before, and the manager said they'd only replace it from the following week's supply. Lunch was in the hotel cafeteria food, soggy rice and shredded chicken, with a bit of luck, a fruit for dessert. I always kept a roll in my apron pocket, knowing there wouldn't be much to eat at home that night. My son, Eric, lived in a world of his own. He started small, fixing computers in Aunt Carol's basement, and then grew up, selling software to large companies. When he signed his first contract for over $100,000, he sent me an excited message saying life was going to change for everyone. Life changed, but only for him. I remained in the same small apartment, riding the old bus, counting coins for my medication. Months passed without news, and the rare conversations we had were by text, dry, without details. I'd ask if he was okay, if he needed anything, and he'd always respond the same way, as if he only had time for a few words. "It's okay, Mom. I'm busy. I'll call you later." And the phone never rang back. Every now and then I'd see a photo on social media. Eric at a fancy dinner, Brittany traveling through Europe, a luxury hotel, a beach with blue water, different cars in each post. I'd look at it all and think I should just accept it because everyone goes their own way, but deep down, it hurt. Especially when I remembered that, while they were in Paris, I was heating up packet soup in the microwave, calculating how many Losartan tablets I could ration until the next purchase. I never liked Brittany's demeanor, but I tried to swallow my pride. She was the type who talked loudly, noticed everything, and had commented more than once that she didn't understand why Eric still sent me money. She made no attempt to hide her discomfort when she came to visit, always staring at the old furniture, pointing out flaws in the paint, even criticizing the smell of the house. The worst was when she'd tell Eric in front of me, jokingly, that Ms. Margaret should try selling something on eBay, because at least then she'd stop keeping old junk. He'd just laugh, change the subject, and I'd pretend not to hear. I felt like a bit player in their lives, someone who only showed up on obligatory occasions like Thanksgiving dinner or Eric's birthday. The rest of the time, we were each in our own world. When I thought about everything I went through raising Eric, just him and me, without a father, without a large family, working odd jobs so I wouldn't lack for anything, it felt strangely overwhelming. I had to learn to mend clothes, negotiate at the pharmacy, and pay my grocery bills in 2 installments. I've stayed up all night waiting for him to come home in the early hours of the morning. I've walked through the snow to pick him up from school when he forgot his coat. In the end, all the effort felt like it had been erased. His success was a source of pride, of course, but also a reminder that I was outside of that new world. And no matter how hard I tried to understand, the truth was, they lived on another planet. If I stopped to count the number of times I had to choose between paying a bill or buying medicine, I think I'd easily lose count. My wallet always contained a crumpled payment receipt, a discount coupon I saved for the end of the month, an old photo of Eric as a young boy, crook-toothed, smiling in his school uniform. I'd look at it before leaving for work and try to convince myself it had been worth it, despite all the sacrifice. But deep down, I felt like time was only taking me away from what truly mattered. That Thanksgiving was no different. The frozen lasagna was still in the oven, and I just wanted dinner to be over because I knew the next day my alarm would go off early and everything would start all over again. But that night, one sentence changed everything. The kind of thing that makes you realize nothing is certain. You're already feeling the weight of this injustice firsthand. Stories like this change the way we view even our own names. Like now and subscribe, because here, each truth exposed is just the beginning of what's to come. And what's coming next will shake everything you know about family. As I set the lasagna dish on the table, I could still hear the oven beeping behind me, mixing the smell of burnt cheese with the disinfectant on the floor. I set out 3 plastic plates, white, with a worn blue rim, which I only used on special occasions. I knew it wasn't a big deal, but I insisted on setting the table as neatly as possible. The white tablecloth had a coffee stain in the corner, but I tried to hide it by folding it under Brittany's plate. She didn't even notice. As soon as she sat down, Brittany dropped her gold purse on the bench next to her and rested her phone on her knee, her fingers swiping quickly across the screen as she typed messages. She didn't look up, even when I wished her, "Enjoy your meal." Eric served himself in silence, took a small piece of lasagna, and moved his fork around, cutting the edges as if searching for a flaw. He asked if I was still working at the hotel, if the new manager was better than Kelly, if the city was still covered in snow even in this strange autumn. The questions came quickly, without waiting for an answer. I noticed that, as he spoke, he would look away from me to the wall, to the clock, to any place other than my face. I tried to smile, to respond, to share something new, but it all felt forced, as if I were repeating rehearsed phrases. Halfway through the meal, Brittany laughed out loud at something on her phone and commented on a photo a friend had posted in Dubai. She said that last month she had stayed in a 6-star hotel with a private pool and that she didn't understand why some people waste their time in a small town. I looked at her, wondering if that comment was meant for me, but it didn't matter. To lighten the mood, I asked if they were enjoying the food, and she simply said, "Okay," picking at the pasta with the tip of her fork, pushing the salad to the side of her plate. The silence was so intense that the ticking of the wall clock seemed too loud. I brought up the subject of the weather, the gas price that had gone up 20 cents that week, and the neighbor who had gotten a new job at Stop and Shop. I mentioned the children running in the hallway and how the building manager was complaining about the noise after 8 o'clock. Eric nodded without paying much attention, and Brittany only looked up when she commented that their building wasn't noisy, because people knew how to behave. For a moment, I considered asking about their lives, about Eric's work, about their travels. But before I could even open my mouth, he pulled his phone out of his pocket to show me a message and changed the subject, saying he might not be able to stay until the end of the night because he had an early meeting on Friday. He was always like this, direct, practical, straightforward. I said I understood, even though I didn't quite believe it. In truth, I just wanted to feel that, somehow, I was still a part of their lives. "When we get together, Everything is so different from what I remembered from when Eric was little. Sometimes I felt like all that was left were formal get-togethers, with no room for real conversation. With every passing minute, dinner felt more like a test than a celebration. Brittany barely touched her food, spending the entire time scrolling through her social media feed, commenting on people I didn't even know. Eric responded occasionally, but in short sentences, as if he didn't want to delve into anything. When the topic turned to work, they talked about a new startup that had opened in Manhattan, about real estate prices in Toronto, about businesses with names I'd never heard of. I tried to change the subject by asking if they had any Christmas plans yet, but Brittany grumbled that it was too early to think about that flights were too expensive because everyone goes south in December. I tried to cling to any detail that would make the moment worthwhile, trying to find a way to feel welcomed, even though I knew it was more of a ritual than a real encounter. Inside, it was impossible not to feel that mix of longing and discomfort. There were times when it felt like I was just sitting there to make ends meet, because that's what you do on important dates. No one there wanted to talk about the past. No one wanted to reminisce about old parties, the cramped family Christmases, the times when dinner meant laughter and not this uncomfortable silence. I looked at the table, at the faces focused on other things, and understood that this was the new reality. And it was in the midst of this emptiness, between one lost sentence and the next, that something happened and changed everything forever. Dinner was dragging along, everyone in their own world, when Eric put down his fork, leaned back in his chair, and, without any ceremony, blurted out, "Mom, are you enjoying the lake house I gave you? I hope you're enjoying it." For a second, time seemed to freeze. I felt my right hand slip from the juice glass, the edge of the plate crooked against the tablecloth, and a warm feeling rose to my face. Lake house? That sentence was so out of context that it took me a moment to believe I'd heard correctly. I looked at him, trying to figure out if it was a joke, a misunderstanding, or just a typo, because at no point in my life had I set foot in a lake house. The room grew quieter than before. Brittany, who had been absorbed in her phone, slowly looked up and went white, her fingers frozen on the screen, unmistakably startled. Neither of us said anything for a few seconds. My head began to spin with meaningless questions. Had he gotten mixed up? Was this her family business? But I quickly dismissed it, because Eric was always straightforward, never one to joke about serious matters like that. I tried to recall every call, every message, searching for any sign that I'd forgotten something important, but found nothing. I took a deep breath, tried to steady my voice, and could only manage to ask, in a whisper, "House? What house, Eric?" I waited for some explanation, perhaps a story about a future plan, a promised gift, a jumble of names, but he didn't look away. He remained there, staring at me, waiting for me to give a positive answer, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. I wanted to get up, find some paper, some note, anything that would make me believe this wasn't just my own madness. My fingers felt cold, my hand clammy on the edge of the plate. I looked around, and everything seemed even smaller, more cramped. It was as if the room had shrunk, and I had shrunk with it. I looked back at Brittany. This time, her face was almost glued to her phone, but it was only a pretense, because the screen's glow was trembling in her hand. The silence was so long I could hear a car engine passing by on the street, the sound of the heater failing, the drop of sauce falling from Eric's spoon straight onto his plate. He insisted, "I'm talking about that house near Lake Ontario, Mom. The wooden house with the deck, the one you always said was your childhood dream." It was as if he were reading from a script I'd never seen. I was completely caught off guard. Every word he spoke seemed like a new language. Lake Ontario is less than 100 kilometers from here. It was always a topic of conversation when he was a kid, when he dreamed of fishing with me. But as a present, all I knew was the reheated lasagna on the table and the feeling of losing control of the ground itself. I searched for a hint of irony, a different expression on Brittany's face, but her gaze was lost, fixed on nothing, unable to hide her discomfort. I noticed she'd gone genuinely pale. At first, I thought it was just the light in the room, but when she put her hand to her neck and held her breath, I realized something was wrong there, wrong in a deep way, as if the question had been asked to me, but the message was meant for her. My mouth went dry, and I tried to swallow but couldn't. The lasagna plate felt like a weight on the table. I didn't know it yet, but in that moment, in that cramped buffalo room, everything I'd understood about my life was about to be dismantled piece by piece. I asked, trying not to stutter, "What house, Eric? I've never received anything." The sentence came out in a low voice, but I couldn't back down. For a few seconds, he just stared at me, trying to decipher if I was joking, perhaps waiting for me to smile and say I was faking it. But nothing came out of me but a fixed stare and a cold hand on the table. The silence became a wall between us. The smell of lasagna, still lingering in the air, now seemed cloying, as if it no longer belonged there. Eric frowned, took a deep breath, and said bluntly, "Mom, I transferred money to you for 2 years. I did everything in your name, sent the house contract, registered the documents with your address. You signed, I saw your signature. There's a copy in Megan's office." With each word, my head felt heavy, as if the world were moving faster than I could keep up. I tried to pinpoint some detail, some moment when I had received any contract, any amount, but all that came was the echo of charges, bills, my repeated life at the hotel, and the lack of credit notices. That's when Brittany shifted quickly in her seat, trying to break the tension. "I need to go to the bathroom, excuse me," she said, already standing and pushing her chair back as if she were genuinely in a hurry. The sound of her bag hitting the side of the table broke the silence and drew my attention to her avoidance of everyone's gaze. She walked into the hallway, closed the bathroom door, and stayed inside long enough for me to hear the toilet flush twice and the sound of the window being pushed open, perhaps in an attempt to hide it. I stared at the closed door, trying to guess what was going through her mind, but all I could hear was a void filled with questions. Eric then pulled out his phone, opened a banking app, and showed a screen full of transfers. Exact amounts, always on the 25th of each month, deposits of $1,500, digital receipts, all with my full name at the top. "Look, Mom, I don't understand. It's all here from the beginning of last year. You received this money, didn't you?" I ran my finger across the screen, seeing those numbers that had never entered my account, and a wave of suspicion washed over me. He continued, "What about the house? You never saw the deed? I had Megan, my assistant, prepare everything, email it, print it, and deliver it in person. I tried to remember some envelope, some unusual visit, but all I'd received in the past few months was advertising, overdue bills, or pizza flyers. Megan, who had always treated me politely the few times we'd crossed paths, never handed me any paperwork. Sitting there across from her own son, I realized something serious was at stake. The security of the details Eric had revealed, the street name, the deposit amounts, the exact times of the supposed deliveries, everything was real, except for me. The atmosphere grew even more tense when Brittany came back from the bathroom. She stood in the doorway, watched for a few seconds, and then faked a cough, pulled out her phone, and pretended to receive an urgent message. She said she had to leave, that it was work, and walked out the door, leaving her bag behind, so desperate was she. I stood there, my hands sweaty, unsure of what to say or do. Eric stood up, banged on the table, and spoke louder. "Mom, this doesn't make sense. I signed everything myself. You're not hiding anything from me, are you?" I stared at him, searching for an answer in my son's face, but all I felt was a distance I'd never felt before. My fingers trembled on the napkin, my eyes burned, my face heated, and I had a strong urge to leave, run to my room and lock myself in. But I couldn't get up. The table became a minefield. His every word felt like an accusation. Brittany's every move made everything even more hazy. It was clear. Something was terribly wrong, but no one there could have imagined the depth of the hole we were about to fall into. Eric didn't want to talk anymore. He got up from his chair, went to his backpack, and pulled out a silver laptop, one of those newer ones that open with a fingerprint. He placed it on the table, right in the middle of the untouched lasagna, and began opening a bunch of files and folders. The screen lit up his face strangely, showing rows of statements, transfer spreadsheets, PDF documents, all organized by date and name. He turned the laptop toward me, pointed with his finger, and spoke slowly, almost demanding I memorize each number. "See? Here. Look. June 25th, 2021. $1,500. July 25th, another $1,500. Every month, like clockwork. And the receipts in your name, Margaret." I stared at that screen full of numbers and my stomach turned. I didn't recognize anything, not a deposit, not a strange amount in my account. I'd spent months, years, looking through statement after statement, trying to balance the pharmacy and rent bills, and if that money had actually come in, I would have noticed. It was impossible not to. I asked if he was sure, because the last unusual transfer I'd seen was from my own salary, $248 net, after taxes and alimony, on the 17th of the previous month. Eric pressed a button and opened a folder labeled Lake Ontario House. There, a flood of files. A copy of the property deed, a purchase and sale agreement, a renovation receipt, even a photo of a white-painted wooden house with wide windows overlooking the lake. He pointed to my supposed signature at the bottom of each page. "You signed it, Mom. There's no way that's fake. The notary has the same signature, and Megan told me she hand-delivered everything." I looked closely. The name was mine. The handwriting even looked familiar, but those signatures weren't mine. The shape of the M, the shape of the G, the rounded end. Nothing matched the way I've written since I was a little girl. I felt my breath catch for a second, tried to think of a time I'd ever signed something like that, but all I could think of were hotel timesheets and grocery checks, all with straight, unadorned lines. I mentioned this to Eric, and his frown deepened. At that moment, Brittany blushed and waved her hands, nearly knocking her glass onto the table. "This has to be a bank error, Eric. Sometimes they make incorrect deposits. Transfer them to a similar name." "You must have forgotten, Margaret." The argument was so weak that he didn't even respond. Instead, he grabbed his cell phone and called Megan immediately, putting it on speakerphone for everyone to hear. Megan answered with that tired end-of-work voice, asking if everything was okay. Eric explained what was happening, mentioned the dates, the deposits, and asked one last time who had the paperwork. Megan didn't hesitate. "Eric, you asked to give everything to Brittany. She said she'd take care of it, asked me to print all the receipts, put them in a manila envelope, and even asked me to send the digital copy to her email and yours. That's what I did, just like the other times." The silence after this explanation was so thick that all I could hear was the sound of my wall clock striking 7:05. Brittany tried to laugh, a nervous laugh, saying that maybe she'd mixed up an envelope, that she'd left her things in the trunk of her car, or that a neighbor had taken them by mistake. Her face was glistening with sweat, her eyes unrestrained. It was impossible not to notice her desperation. Eric turned to her, his voice lower now. "Are you sure you gave everything to my mom? All the contracts, the deposits, the keys?" Brittany hesitated, picked at her nails, and looked away. I thought so. Maybe I just got so overwhelmed with things, you know. That month was crazy." I stared at the scene, trying to piece it all together. It was so much information. Contracts I'd never seen, money I'd never received, a house that existed only on my computer screen, a signature that matched my own, but which I didn't recognize. Suddenly, I realized the answer wasn't just there, on the desk. It was in the path each document took from Eric's office to my hands. The strange thing was, none of them had actually reached me. I felt goosebumps crawl on my arm, an overwhelming urge to ask Eric to call the bank, the notary, anyone who could explain how all of this could be so real to them and so impossible to me. Eric's look was no longer one of distrust, but of someone trying to understand the impossible. I saw there before him a man suspicious of his own wife, the kind of thing that destroys an entire family from the inside out. And it was in this confusion of evidence, voices, and excuses that a piece began to come loose. That dinner table became a trench, and what was about to unfold from then on would spare no one. It took a while for it to sink in, but it felt like a door had opened, revealing everything that had been hidden under my nose for so long. While Eric tried to reorganize the papers and Brittany only mumbled excuses, I began to piece together the loose pieces. I picked up the envelope she'd left on the table and searched for any receipt, anything that would explain all that money's disappearance. There was nothing. The silence between us was so uncomfortable that even the sound of the neighbors slamming their doors in the hallway seemed too loud. Eric, already impatient, returned to his laptop, typed in some passwords, and showed me the transfer history again. He enlarged the image of a digital bank account statement in my name, but I'd never seen that number before. It didn't match my local bank card, nor the passwords I'd been using for 20 years. The deposit amounts appeared month by month, always on the 25th, all correct, except the address registered to that account wasn't mine. "Look at this, Mom. Maple Street, number 510. Do you live on Maple Street?" I shook my head. My address had been different since 2008. That's when everything fell apart. Eric went to the closet, grabbed the box of old mail I usually keep, and together we started going through each one. Among the electricity bills, old birthday cards, and supermarket flyers, there was no deposit slip, no statement, no real estate paperwork. Everything he claimed to have sent never arrived. Brittany then sat on the couch, curled up, and stared at the floor, speechless, her face wet with sweat. It didn't take long for Eric to call the bank manager, using speakerphone, and ask for clarification about the account in my name. The manager confirmed that the account had been opened a little over 2 years ago, in person, with original documents. All that was needed was an ID, proof of residence, and a signature matching the one on the document. But I had never set foot in that branch. And to open a new account, in addition to an ID, they required a recent photo. The description of the person at the opening matched Brittany. The manager asked if I wanted to file a police report for fraud. Eric answered for me, saying yes, that it was absurd, and that someone had to answer for all that mess. It was at that moment that Brittany broke down. She said, her voice trembling, that she had done everything out of desperation because her parents were about to lose their house. She confessed to using my documents, forging a signature, asking a college friend for help, filling out the digital form, opening the account, transferring everything Eric sent month after month. She made up an address, got the deed to the lake house, and registered her parents as residents. They had been living there for almost 2 years without ever paying a cent. The wooden deck, the wide windows, the fresh paint job, all financed with money that should have been mine. I didn't even know what to feel. On one hand, the humiliation of having been deceived by someone who frequented my table. On the other, fear. Eric went white, eyes wide, unsure how he'd missed anything. He asked her why she did that, if she wasn't ashamed. Brittany didn't answer. She kept her head down, sobbing, saying she didn't want to hurt anyone, just help her family. But it was too late. While Eric was trying to reach the lawyer on the phone, I began to notice another series of problems. Old collection letters in my name, but to an unfamiliar address. A letter from the IRS that, at the time, I thought was just advertising, but referred to tax liabilities. I discovered that a $10,000 loan had been taken out in my name. A credit card I never applied for was overdue. Each new piece of paper was a punch in the gut. Eric's lawyer explained that I needed to gather all the documents, record everything in detail, and report it immediately to the police. That night, as the clock struck 10:42, I realized everyone's lives had changed. My story, already full of scars, now bore a mark impossible to ignore. And it wasn't even rock bottom yet. Time seemed to stand still in that room, even with the wall clock already pointing to almost 11. Eric stood in front of Brittany, trying to understand every word, while she curled up on the couch, hiding her face in her hands. I couldn't say anything, only felt my legs heavy, my eyes full, my head throbbing from everything that had been stolen. It wasn't just money, it was my trust, my history, my years of sacrifice. When the lawyer advised me to file a report, it sank in. The crime was no small one. Using someone's documents, opening a bank account, forging a signature, making transfers, deceiving one's own husband. All of this, combined, was punishable by prison. It wasn't until the police arrived that Brittany completely broke down. The officers walked steadily up to the 3rd floor, asked who was responsible, requested documents, and calmly wrote everything down. She cried, saying she didn't want to hurt anyone, that she just wanted to prevent her parents from being evicted, that she needed to care for her brother, who had been ill for months. But nothing explained the embezzlement of nearly $80,000, the illegally occupied lake house, the loan in my name, the accumulated charges, the risk of losing everything if the IRS decided to pursue the investigation. When they slapped the handcuffs on her, the silence returned with a vengeance. The blare of the police radio in the hallway, the sound of footsteps descending the stairs, the low voices of neighbors trying to make out the commotion at the apartment door. Brittany kept repeating between sobs, "I needed to help my family. You didn't need it that much, Ms. Margaret." I couldn't even respond. It was as if my tongue had stuck to the roof of my mouth. Eric's face, as he watched his wife being taken away, was one of someone who had been struck in the soul. He stood there, motionless, staring into space. He only sat back down when the police officers left. The night didn't end there. I sat at the table, papers spread out in front of me, trying to figure out where everything had gone wrong. The phone rang. It was Megan. She was crying on the other end, saying she had no idea, that she'd only followed orders, that she'd never imagined the documents would end up in the wrong hands. She apologized constantly, repeating that she felt betrayed, used, as deceived as I was. I tried to calm Megan, but it was difficult, because deep down I felt guilty too. Guilt for never having questioned anything, for being too trusting, for thinking bad things only happened when we weren't around. In the following days, the apartment became a hub for investigation. Eric's lawyer came almost every day, bringing new letters to analyze, asking for old documents, trying to organize the pile of problems. I had to testify at the police station, explaining step by step everything I remembered, how many times Brittany had been with me, when she'd asked to borrow documents, if I'd ever signed any paperwork without knowing. I answered everything, but deep down, I felt like no one would give me back my lost time or my peace of mind. Every call from the bank was a reminder of the extent of the damage. Eric couldn't sleep well. He spent nights awake, pacing the hallway, calling lawyers, trying to reach the IRS, trying to figure out what could still be recovered. He barely looked at me, as if the shame of it all weighed heavily on him. At one point, he said he was thinking of selling the new apartment just to pay for what Brittany had stolen. I told him I didn't care about money. I wanted my life back. I didn't want to answer police questions. I just wanted to be invisible again, at least to my problems. Seeing Brittany arrested brought no relief. It was just sadness, just heaviness, just emptiness. The news spread quickly, in the neighborhood, at work, among friends. I received messages from people I hadn't seen in years, people saying they were sorry, people wanting details, people asking how I hadn't suspected something sooner. At no point did I feel genuine anger, just a deep exhaustion, the kind that doesn't go away even with weeks of rest. Even though justice was being served, it felt like everything I'd experienced up until that point was just a rehearsal for that pain. And the worst part was that none of it was going away quickly. The chasm that opened that night left scars that neither the police, nor the lawyer, nor the bank, nor anyone else could erase. It took months of investigation, piles of documents, lengthy hearings, and many trips to the lawyer's office. I lost count of how many times I had to sign papers, give statements, and review every detail of the fraud Brittany had orchestrated behind my back. At first, I confess, I didn't believe I'd ever be entitled to anything back. After living on a meager salary for so long, it seemed impossible to believe I'd ever be able to recover not only what had been taken from me, but also some of the dignity that had been taken with it. But things began to change when the ruling was handed down. The judge not only acknowledged the entire scam, but also ordered that the lake house, which for so long had existed only as a lost photo on Eric's laptop, finally be transferred, for real, into my name. The market value was almost $200,000, and I still had the money for the renovations, all done with money that had been my due from the beginning. Eric's lawyer managed to prove every penny embezzled, every deposit, every forged signature. Brittany was sentenced to 18 months in prison, and her family was forced to leave the house immediately. The day the keys arrived in the hands of a bailiff, I could hardly believe it. I walked up to the porch, looked out at the frozen lake reflecting the gray March sky, and let the wind blow on my face as if it were waking me from a dream that had lasted since Thanksgiving the previous year. I walked through the front door to clean wood floors, freshly painted walls, the smell of a new home. Every corner had been renovated. Everything was simple, yet beautiful. In the backyard, the wooden deck was finally mine. No part of me was accustomed to so much space, so much peace, so much light streaming through the windows. The money Brittany embezzled returned to my account with interest and a generous severance package, more than I could have imagined after so many years counting pennies for the market. With this newfound security, I finally allowed myself to stop. I applied for early retirement at Horizon Suites, and on my last day of work, I was greeted with an impromptu cake in the hotel's pantry, amid hugs from my cleaning colleagues and Rita's jokes about who would inherit my old squeegee. Eric changed after all of this. The divorce was painful, but it felt like a weight had been lifted. He started calling me almost every weekend, arranged coffee at my new place, helped install the microwave, and even showed up unexpectedly with a shopping basket to stock the pantry. He let go of his distant demeanor and became closer than ever before. We saw each other more in 6 months than we had in the last 5 years. It was during this time that I met Jennifer. She was a forensic accountant hired by the lawyer's office to analyze all the fraud paperwork, and she became a regular presence at the case meetings. Unlike most people I've crossed paths with lately, Jennifer treated me with warmth and respect from the start. She had an easy smile, a leisurely listener, a fondness for cornmeal cake, and always asked how I was doing, not just out of politeness. She and Eric grew closer after it was all over. It wasn't long before they became partners, not only at work, but in life. And to my surprise, Jennifer also became my friend. She called to see if I needed anything, showed up to help paint the kitchen, and even took me for a walk around town one spring Sunday. Sitting on that porch, watching the sun set behind the trees on the lake, I realized that, even after everything, life had given me an unexpected chance to start over. It wasn't just a beautiful house or my money back. It was the peaceful silence after so much noise, the possibility of sleeping without fear, of waking up without a list of bills piling up. For the first time in years, I could take a deep breath, look around, and feel that, finally, the worst was behind me. I just didn't imagine there would still be one more lesson to learn before everything truly fell into place. The porch of the lake house has become my favorite spot. Sometimes I sit there early, before 7 in the morning, just to listen to the gentle sound of the water lapping against the deck and watch the reflections of the trees form when the wind barely stirs the leaves. It wasn't easy getting here, but looking back, I see that everything Brittany did was nothing more than a detour, a painful delay, but it wasn't enough to steal what was most important to me, my future. I lost sleep, lost trust in people, lost the desire to leave the house for months, but I gained something no amount of money can buy. I regained my peace. I discovered a strength I never imagined I had. I was tested in every way, surrounded by doubts, people pointing fingers, people wanting to know why I let all this happen. For a long time, I carried a silent guilt, thinking that maybe it was my responsibility, that I should have seen the signs sooner, that trusting had been my biggest mistake. But today I know it wasn't weakness. What I experienced was proof that no one is immune to the evil of others, no matter how much we want to believe in the best of people. I forgave Eric, not only for the distance, but for trusting someone who didn't deserve it and for letting our mother-son relationship grow cold. He apologized to me more than once, stood by me in every difficult meeting, and handled every detail of the process as if he could make up for lost time. I saw the weight of regret in his eyes, but I also saw a desire to truly start over. I also needed to forgive myself. I spent years thinking that being strong meant never asking for help, never admitting I was tired, never saying no. Today I understand that acknowledging a mistake, accepting an outstretched hand, doesn't make me less. It only makes me more of a person. What I've never been able to do is forgive Brittany. No matter how hard I try, it's not about revenge nor endless hurt, but about a very clear boundary. Some people cross a point of no return, and she chose this of her own free will, even though she had a choice. What she did changed my life, took much more than money, but it didn't take away my dignity. She didn't steal my hope, and it doesn't matter if justice did its job. What matters is that, after all this, I've learned to protect what I have left and to value every step forward. If you're listening to this story, I want to remind you, there's no such thing as permanent loss as long as you believe in your worth. Many people will try to walk all over you, make you doubt yourself, instill fear, suggest it's not worth fighting for. Don't let them. What happened to me could have ended me, but I chose not to be defined by it. My name isn't synonymous with tragedy. I'm proof that even lost time can be recovered, one way or another, when we refuse to be reduced to what was done to us. Today, I can say I'm moving forward with my head held high. The lake is still out there, the same as every day, and I'm still here, more whole than ever. If this story touched you, leave a comment below and check out the other videos on the channel. There's still much truth to be revealed, and no one will silence my voice anymore. Now you understand. This wasn't just a story. You felt the impact of every choice, every silence, every betrayal exposed at the dinner table, because it all reveals the most real part of those who fight not to be erased. Write in the comments, "No one takes away my worth." I want to read your statement below, just as I had to face every truth, looking into the eyes of those who tried to destroy me. Tell me what you would do in my place, or if you've ever experienced an injustice that changed your path. Your voice needs to be heard, just as mine was. You're already part of this story just by getting this far. Stories like this have the power to tear us out of our comfort zone, to turn everything we think about trust, survival, and starting over upside down. Only those who have had something stolen understand the weight of reclaiming one's self-worth. Don't let this story die here. Like it now, because every click makes this truth reach farther to those who still need to hear that there is a way out. Subscribe now on the channel. Here, you'll never find empty stories or easy endings. Each video exposes what many try to hide and shows that no one is defined by what they suffered, but by what they choose to do afterward. Turn on notifications and secure your place in this community that grows every day. Here, each new story is an invitation to face the world head-on and learn firsthand what it means to truly overcome. Stay with me. The next video is already on screen. Did you find this story intense? Wait until you see what comes next. Don't look away. Click now and discover why there are truths that no one can keep quiet.